less than 24 hours is when the Union Budget 2024 will be announced. For the moment, the live news briefing of the Chief Economic Advisor. Let's listen in.
Very few weeks in between hasn't really lived up to the billing that we were looking for. And talking of agricultural diversification, you can see that livestock, forestry and logging and fishing and aquaculture have recorded a much higher growth than the traditional crops. So ultimately, like farmers, like everybody else, respond to price signals and other incentives. So if we can make sure that through a combination of policies that we can actually incentivize them taking up other areas of allied agricultural activities, moving away from grains, we will make our farming both remunerative, climate friendly, and also water friendly. So this is the framework. This is covered in detail in box 5, in a box in chapter 5. I would urge you to go through that for more detailed elaboration of each and every one of these 5 aspects, which would help make sure that Indian farming sector becomes an engine of growth. Moving on to manufacturing and SME, that is another sector where we need to focus. How do we create an SME space, Mittelstand in German as they call it? Most important thing we can do from the government perspective is deregulation. Threshold-based incentives must have sunset clauses, but more importantly, much of the action is required at the state government level and local government level as well, which is where much of licensing, inspection and compliance, the LIC, acronym, is very important to loosen the grip in the local government level. And then when it comes to skilling, most of our entrepreneurs are very instinctively entrepreneurial, understand their business and customers very well. Where they need trainings with respect to financial management, working capital, inventory management, etc. So targeted interventions will have a big bang for the buck in terms of boosting their productivity. Other important aspect of the LIC being loosened is that most of the small enterprises have very limited management bandwidth. So if we can kind of reduce the compliance burden on them, we also release the bandwidth for them to focus on growing their business and also focusing on their human resource endowment as well. And that is what will make India's lopsided distribution of enterprises. Too many micro, some large, but a huge gap in the middle that needs to be plugged for us to raise the manufacturing share of GDP and the manufacturing employment share as well. Financial access usually is considered a very big roadblock for MSME growth. We have done quite well in that regard, both during COVID and afterwards, by providing the guarantees. The number of CGT MSE guarantees invoked and the amount used up are quite good. Without this intervention, the micro and small enterprise sector would have faced even more difficulty. So this has really worked in preserving the health of the MSME space. And then the startup ecosystem, from over 13,000 DPI recognized startups are there, and the number of patents filed per year, it is not a typo, it's real, has gone up by 17x between FY15 and FY24, 17 times in the course of 9 years. So startups usually begin with not micro space but small and medium space. So we are definitely paying attention to the financing and the ecosystem aspects of nurturing SMEs. And we are also beginning to realize the potential of the digital public infrastructure in making sure that our micro, small and medium enterprises have global access through the digital network. They don't need a physical presence. The open network digital commerce, I remember writing about it with Mr. Nilekani about 2 years ago. It has a very big potential to make our even small enterprises global players. And you can see the statistics here in terms of the number of cities being covered, number of transactions happening. Most of them are small sellers, etc. So this is definitely has a huge potential in realizing our MSME aspirations as well. But above all, what we need to focus on is the deregulation aspect. And I can't go into the full details of all the rules and regulations on laws that need to be loosened. We are only giving you a couple of examples. For example, the amount of space Indian laws mandate that per worker is 3.4 square meters, and even Southeast Asian countries, advanced economies, have a much lower requirement. On the left side, you can see the amount of land we need to allocate for setbacks on all four sides, the parking space, and the floor space index is much lower in India. And these are all state government regulations, not union government. And even if majority of the Indian states move towards the best Indian state, which on the basis of a study happens to be Haryana, if they move to Haryana level, the amount of land we free up for our businesses to utilize for actual manufacturing goes up. So per unit fixed cost of production will come down dramatically, opening up space for them to hire more workers. So that's why I said the clue to sustaining growth lies in the nuts and bolts of economic deregulation. And second example is the floor area ratio and the car parking spaces compared to, for example, what Singapore or Hong Kong and even the most industrialized states of India have only one floor space ratio. Haryana is 1.5, Odisha is better, Uttar Pradesh is much lower, and look at the amount of car parking spaces we mandate is much more than what typically Singapore and Hong Kong, which are manufacturing powerhouses, also mandate. They are much more than what they ask for. So in all these senses, it leads to a loss of about 3 lakh crores in terms of for a micro factory. And for a mega factory, it's about 3.2, micro is about 2.7 lakhs, etc. So there is a huge sort of low-hanging fruit here in deregulation from the point of view of boosting economic output. The other aspect is also with respect to rising formalization of the workforce. We are seeing that in the EPO4 membership, and we also saw that in the annual survey of industries, factory workers in the larger factories growing much faster. And what is heartening to see is that some of the staffing companies have recorded an average growth rate of 13.2% in the last 10 years, because these workers come with full benefits. ESIC, EPFO, gratuity, work contract, payment of salary through banks, all these things are prevalent in the case of workers hired through the staffing companies as well. And one of the highlights of our chapter on labor and employment, chapter 8, we have done an estimation of what is the amount of jobs we need to create. And you might wonder why we stop at 2036 and not go up to 2047. If you look at the population estimates given by Ministry of Health in July 2020 in a publication which is open access, they project India's population until 2036. So based on those projections, we estimate that India basically needs to create roughly around 8 million jobs or 80 lakh jobs per annum. The calculations and the assumptions are given in the survey as well. In fact, we are making available the spreadsheet as well for replication. And what is heartening with respect to the skilling requirements is that earlier we used to worry a lot about enrollment in higher education. That is no longer the concern in India. The aspirations have shifted. It's about learning outcomes. In rural India in 2000, only 2.4% took to higher education. Now that number is 10.8 in 2022. Only 17.9% took to higher secondary education. Now it is 42.9%. So enrollments have picked up tremendously. On the right side, what you see is that tertiary education was 6.7%. Now it is 28.4%. And what you don't see here, but in the survey you will see the ratio of women to men in tertiary education used to be 77 to 100. Now it is 96 to 100. So there is no more of a gap between women and men enrolling in higher education, the fruits of which will be evident to us in the coming years. And I talked about two examples of deregulation. This is the third example. Number of activities restricted for women in different states is totaling 139. We just took a sample of about 10 states. This is based on some very good work done by an independent agency. So when we talk of boosting female labor force participation rate, boosting production, etc., again, this is in the realm of state government. Some of these restrictions are preventing women from participating more in the labor market. Skilling, what used to be 33.3%, the proportion of people who take the employability test and pass was only 1/3. Now it is more than 1/2. But still we can say that the journey has been impressive, but the task ahead still is quite large, with little under half still not considered employable based on this national test being administered. But the progress is important to make note of.